do a review of two-step equations, and we'll work through some problems as you see on the worksheet that was included in the module. Alright, so two-step equations. In any equation, your objective is always to get the variable by itself. Why do we want to get the variable by itself? Because we want to find out its value. Okay, and that's the importance of equations, is to find the value of the unknown. Okay, we do that by getting it by itself on one side of the equal sign. All right, and it's a two-step process, at least in the two-step equations. The first one, we're going to undo the addition and subtraction. And the second thing we'll do is we'll undo the division and multiplication. Now you may say, why are we doing addition and subtraction first? Because in PEMDAS, it told us that we wanted to do multiplication and division before addition and subtraction, correct? Well, that's because we were simplifying expressions, okay? What we're doing now is trying to find the unknown value in an equation. When we're going to do that by undoing the operations. And by undoing them, we're going backwards. Okay, so you can think of it that way if you like. We're using PEMDAS in reverse form. Addition and subtraction first before multiplication and division. Okay, we're not going to be doing any exponents or parentheses or grouping in two-step. We will be doing that in multi-step equations. Okay, so let's just go ahead and start working through some of the problems on the worksheet. Okay, I'm going to skip number one because number one is its value is 0. Okay, and it doesn't do a real good job of describing the steps. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with number 2. So number 2 is 3 minus 3x, and you'll notice that I used the variable in a different color. Okay, that's to bring attention to you so you can helps you identify the variable. All right, at least when you're learning, it's good to do stuff like that just to make things kind of jump out at you. All right, so the first thing you always want to do when you're doing an equation is to identify the variable or the variable term. That term which includes the variable in it. And this one is the x is the variable, and the term is a negative 3x. Okay, so might not want to actually put any square around it, but in your mind you should identify that term. Okay, and look at it and say, okay, well, there we have it. There is our, and I want that to be really faded. There is our variable term. And we want to get that. Our first step is to undo the addition and subtraction. Okay, this is multiplication in this. It's a negative 3 times x. Okay, so that is not the first step. The first step is addition or subtraction. Okay, and if you look at this, we're trying to get that by itself. Well, there's the 3. Now, you may remember from the beginning of school, actually, that any variable or whole number that is, or constant, that starts an expression or an equation is actually, if there's no sign there, it's actually a positive or a plus. Okay, so there we have it. That's the plus or addition that we're going to undo. You undo that by doing the opposite. Okay, so you hear a lot about inverse. Okay, inverse. Well, inverse just means the opposite of. Okay, so the inverse of the opposite of addition is subtraction, and the opposite of multiplication is division, and vice versa. So the opposite of minus or subtraction is a plus or addition, and the opposite of division is multiplication, and vice versa. Multiplication is division. All right, so we want to do the inverse of the opposite of a plus 3. So we're going to subtract 3. And whatever you do on one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other. Okay, be very organized. All right, so you really have 2 math problems with equations. Remember, there's 2 sides. Each sides have to say equal. So whatever you do on one side, you have to do the other. You have to. All right, so let's go ahead and do the math. So 3 minus 3 is 0, so that got rid of that. That's what we wanted to do. We moved it over there. So those cross out. Let's go ahead and bring down the negative 3x, because remember, you're adding or subtracting like terms. There are no like terms on this side of the equal sign to add or subtract to it. So you bring that down. Equals 27 minus 3 is 24. Okay, so step 1. is done. We undid the addition by subtracting. Let's go down to the second step. Let's undo division or multiplication. They're multiplying, because remember, negative 3x is actually negative 3 times x. Okay? If they're right next to each other without any operator between them, it's multiplication. It's assumed. Okay? So the opposite of multiplication is division. Multiplication is division. You remember in algebra, in division, one way of showing that is with a fraction. I always say if you get to the last term here like this, and you don't have the variable by itself, if it's not a fraction, you make it a fraction with whatever's next to the variable. In this case, it's a negative 3. Okay, so you make the fraction. On the bottom, you put whatever is next to the variable that you want to get by itself. And again, whatever you do on one side, you've got to do to the other. Okay? Remember that anything over itself is equal to 1. Okay, so anything over itself is equal to 1. So that allows you to cross those out and simplify that to 1. So this is 1x. Of course, the 1 is assumed. And then 24 divided by a negative 3 is a negative 8. Okay, so you found the value of the variable x. It is a negative 3. Now, we won't be doing this with each of these examples, but to prove your answer, you would just take that value and plug it into the x. So to the original problem. So let's go ahead and do that real quick for this one. So 3 minus 3 times negative 8 equals 27. So we've taken that value we found and plugged it into the original problem. So 3 minus a negative 3 times a negative 8 is a positive 24 equals 27. 3 plus 24 is 27. So 27 equals 27. Yes, we know we're correct. All right. Now I'm going to move quickly on these because you can always hit pause. Okay. And so I'm going to move through these quickly. If you need to hit pause to take notes, which you should be doing, go ahead and do so. But I'm going to move more quickly on these than I normally would. Okay. Let's identify the variable. It's a negative 1n, right? The 1 is assumed. Minus 1 equals a negative 7. We've identified the variable term. First step is to undo addition or subtraction. They're subtracting a negative 1 from the variable in this one, so we're going to do the opposite. Opposite of minus 1 is a plus 1. Whatever you do on one side, you have to do the other. Now it becomes a vertical problem, two separate ones. There's nothing to add or subtract. There are no like terms to add or subtract to a negative 1n. So we bring that down. Negative 1 plus 1 is 0, so that took care of that. It removed it from that side, but that's what we wanted. And then negative 7 plus 1 is a negative 6. Okay, so we took care of step number 1. We did the addition or subtraction. Now, this one might confuse you a little bit because you say, well, there is no division or multiplication here, but actually there is, right? Because we know that there's a 1 in front of there. Okay, so the second step is to take that negative 1n, and we want it, that's a multiplication problem, negative 1 times n, and do the opposite. Remember, the opposite of a multiplication is division, so we're going to make that a fraction. And on the bottom, we're going to put whatever is next to the variable or anything we want to remove. In this case, it's a negative 1, and whatever you do on one side of the equal sign, you need to do to the other. So negative 1 over negative 1, that 1 is assumed, of course, is a 1. That leaves n by itself. Negative 6 over a negative 1. Negative 6 divided by negative 1 is 6. So n is equal to 6. Quickly, let's plug that 6 into the n. Negative 6 minus 1 is a negative 7. Negative 7 does equal negative 7. So we know we're correct. Okay, let's move on to number 4. Let's identify the variable term. Variable term in this one is negative 4n. n is the variable. The term is negative 4n. So let's think about that. Okay, so here it is. Let's think about what's being done to it, what needs to be moved to the other side. This is a +3, correct? Because it's assumed, but that's actually a +3 because there's no sign there. So we're going to do the opposite of a +3. The opposite of a +3 is a -3. Whatever you do on one side, you need to do to the other of the side of the equal sign. Then becomes a vertical problem. 3 minus 3 is 0. Let's bring down the -4n because there's no like terms to add or subtract to that. And then 3 minus 3 is 0. Okay. Again, negative. We've taken care of the first step. We've undid the addition or subtraction. Now we want to undo division or multiplication. This term is a -4n. So they're multiplying a -4 times n. We do the opposite. There's not a fraction at this point. You make it a fraction with whatever is next to the variable. Whatever you do on one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other. Go ahead. Anything over itself is 1, so we can cross those out. That leaves n by itself, and 0 over a -4 is a 0. Right? 0 divided by -4 is 0. So the value of the variable is 0. If we plug that in, we have 3 minus 4 times 0. 4 times 0 is 0. So 3 minus 0 equals 3. 3 does equal 3, and we know we got that one correct. Let's move on to number 5. Identify the variable term. In this case, it's a over 2. The variable is a. The term is plus a over 2. Okay, so what's on that side of the equal sign that we need to move and get a over 2 by itself? The 2, right? It's a +2. We're going to do the opposite. It's -2. Whatever we do on one side of the equal sign, we do need to do the other. Now it becomes a vertical problem. 2 minus 2 is 0. There's nothing to add or subtract to the a over 2. So let's go ahead and bring that down. And then 4 minus 2 is 2. So that's the first step to undo the addition or subtraction. Let's go ahead and do the second step. Let's undo the division here, right? A divided by 2. We do that by doing the opposite. They're dividing, so we're going to multiply. When you multiply by whatever is on the bottom of the fraction now, right? Multiply by whatever's on the bottom of the fraction. And then remember, whatever you do on one side, you have to do to the other. Then let's do the math. 2 over 2, again, we're back to the fraction with the same thing on the top and the bottom. 2 over 2 equals 1, so we can cross that out. That leaves a by itself. Bring it down. 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, so we found the unknown. It is 4. If we plug that in, again, if you want to do it, write it out, you can. 4 over 2 is 2. 4 divided by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 plus 2 is 4. 4 does equal 4, so we know we got it correct. Let's move on to number 6. Let's identify the variable. It's p. The variable term is p over 3. So we need to get that by itself on that side of the equal sign. Okay, so what's being added or subtracted to that variable term? A -2. Right there it is. We do the opposite. Let's undo the subtraction by doing the opposite. We're going to add 2. We're going to add 2, and whatever we do on one side, we have to do to the other. Always being nice and neat, being organized. We have 2 separate math problems right here on one on each side of the equal sign. A -2 plus 2 is 0, so that moved it over to the other side. There's nothing to add or subtract to the p over 3, so let's bring that down. Let's go ahead and bring that down. Good night, Ricky. P over 3 equals a -2. -4 plus 2 is -2. Alrighty, so that takes care of step 1. We took care of the addition and subtraction. Now let's go ahead and undo the division or multiplication. They're dividing, right? Fraction is a division problem. So we're going to do the opposite. We're going to multiply by whatever is on the bottom of the fraction. So we're going to multiply the top by 3. Whatever you do on one side of the equal sign, you do to the other. 3 over 3 is equal to 1, so we can cross that out. bring down the variable p. Negative 2 times 3 is a negative 6. So we have identified the value of p. Again, let's in our head, just let's go plug it in. Negative 6 over 3, negative 6 divided by 3 is a negative 2. Negative 2 plus negative 2 is a negative 4. And a negative 4 does equal a negative 4, so we know that we got that one correct. Let's move on to number 7. To identify the variable, first thing, it's v. The variable term is v over 2, or v divided by 2. So we know that's what we need to get by itself on this side of the equal sign. What is on that equal side of the equal sign, and what's being done? It's subtracting 3. That's that first step. So the opposite of a negative 3, to undo that, is a plus 3 or positive 3. Whatever you do on one side, you have to do to the other. Again, being nice and neat. Now it becomes a vertical problem. There's nothing to add or subtract. There's no like term to v over 2. So let's bring that down. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0. Negative 6 plus 3 is a negative 3. Okay, so that takes care of step number 1. Step number 2, let's undo the division and multiplication. We're dividing v by 2, so we're going to multiply, because the opposite of division is multiplication. We're going to multiply by whatever is on the bottom of the fraction. Whatever you do on one side, you need to do to the other. Those cross out, leave the v by itself. So v equals negative 3 times 2 is a negative 6. So the value of v is negative 6. Let's plug that in. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Negative 3 minus 3 is a negative 6. Negative 6 does equal a negative 6. So we know we're correct. Let's move on to number 7. Move on to number 8. Let's identify the variable as k. We want to get k by itself. What's being done to this term? They're subtracting from it, right? Negative 1. Let's do the opposite. And opposite of a negative 1 is a plus 1. Whatever you do on one side, you need to do to the other. Work vertically at this point. Negative 1 plus 1 is 0. There's nothing to add or subtract to that k over 4, so let's bring it down. Equals. Bring the equal sign down. 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay, so the first step is done. Second step, let's undo the division and multiplication. Okay, so they're dividing here. K divided by 4, so we're going to multiply. We're going to multiply by whatever is on the bottom. And whatever you do on one side, you need to do the other. 4 over 4 equals 1, so we can cross those out. That leaves us with k equals 8. So we have found the value of the unknown. Let's plug that in. 8 over 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2. Negative 1 plus 2 is a positive 1. 1 equals 1. We're correct. Number 8. K equals 8. Let's move on to number 9. 9. To identify the variable, it's n. So the variable term is n over 2. We want to get that by itself. All right, so what are they doing to that variable term that we need to do? They're subtracting 3. So we're going to do the opposite by adding 3. Whatever you do on one side, you'd have to do to the other. Draw your lines to make your two math problems. Now you work vertically. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0. It crosses those out. There's nothing to add or subtract to n over 2, so you bring that down. Negative 5 plus 3 is a negative 2. So we got that first step done. Step number 2 is to undo the division or multiplication. They're dividing, right? N divided by 2, so the opposite of division is multiplication. So you're going to multiply by whatever's on the bottom of the fraction. And whatever you do on one side, you have to do to the other. 2 over 2 equals 1. That allows us to cross that out. N equals a negative 2 times 2 is a negative 4. N equals negative 4. Let's plug that in. Negative 4 divided by 2 is a negative 2. Negative 3 plus a negative 2 is a negative 5. Negative 5 equals negative 5. We know we got the correct answer. Let's move on to number 10. The variable term is n over 2. We need to get that by itself. What are they doing to that term? They're adding 3 to it, right? Because there's no sign, so that's a plus 3. We're going to do the opposite of that. We're going to subtract 3, and whatever you do on one side, you have to do the other. Draw your lines, be nice and neat. Now it's vertical. 3 minus 3 is 0. There's nothing to add or subtract to that n over 3, so let's bring it down. Bring down that equal sign. 8 minus 3 is 5. So step number 1 is complete. Step number 2 now is to undo the division or multiplication. They're dividing here. They're dividing n by 2. So the opposite of dividing is multiplying. We're going to multiply by whatever's on the bottom of the fraction. Whatever you do on one side, you have to do to the other. 2 over 2 is 1, so you can cross those out. That leaves n by itself. 5 times 2 is 10. N is equal to 10. Let's plug that in. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8. 8 does equal to 8, so we know we're correct. Number 10. Let's move on to number 11. Variable is v. The variable term is 3v, right? They're multiplying there. They're multiplying, so we're not going to do that first. We're going to do that second. What's on that side, the equal sign that we need to move over? They're subtracting 5 from that term. So we're going to do the opposite. We're going to add. So let's add 5 to one side. Whatever you do with the other side, you need to do the other. 5 minus 5, negative 5 plus 5 is 0. There's nothing to add or subtract to that. There's no like terms. So you bring that down. Negative 5 plus 5, negative 8 plus 5 is a negative 3. That takes care of step 1. Step 2, we're going to undo this multiplication, right? That's 3 times v. It's 3 times v. The opposite of multiplication is division. So if you get down to this point, there's no fraction, you make it a fraction with whatever is next to the variable. In this case, it's a 3. Whatever you do on one side, you need to do to the other. 3 over 3 is equal to 1, so that allows you to cross those out. That leaves v by itself. Negative 3 divided by 3. Negative 3 divided by 3 is a negative 1. V equals negative 1. Let's go ahead and plug it in. So 3 times a negative 1 is a negative 3. Negative 5 plus a negative 3 is a negative 8. Negative 8 does equal to a negative 8, so we know we are correct. That is number 11. Let's move on to the last one. Number 12 is the one we've been looking for. Identify the variable as n. The variable term is a negative 3n, so that's what we want to get by itself. What's being done to that variable term? They're subtracting 2. They're subtracting 2, so let's go ahead and do the opposite. The opposite of a negative 2 is a plus 2. Whatever you do on one side, you do to the other. Now we do that vertical math. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. There's nothing to add or subtract to the negative or minus 3n, so let's bring it down. Always remembering to bring that operator down with you, that sign. Let's bring the equal sign down. Then 19 plus 2 is 21. So that takes care of step 1, undoing the addition or subtraction. Now let's go ahead and do step number 2, which is to undo the division or multiplication. They're multiplying in this one, right? Negative 3 times n is just written in a different way. Let's go ahead and make that a fraction. If there's not a fraction at this point, you make it a fraction with whatever is next to the variable you want to get by itself. In this case, it's a negative 3 or a minus 3. Whatever you do on one side, you need to do the other. That allows you, of course, because negative 3 over negative 3, anything over itself is equal to 1. That allows you to mark those negative 3's out. That leaves that n by itself is what we were looking for. 21 divided by negative 3 is a negative 7. So n equals negative 7. Plug it in. Negative 3 times a negative 7 is a positive 21. Negative 2 plus a positive 21 is a positive 19. 19 does equal 19. Okay, again, work at your own pace. You go ahead, rewind, take a look, practice more. You can contact me. I'll Zoom with you. We can go over it more if you'd like. And we're going to have a test at the beginning of class on Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on what day you have me. All right. Happy sales.